During the evening, I woke up because I felt somebody tapping me on the shoulder. And I looked up and there was this kind-looking woman. And she said, "You know, you mustn't worry." She said, "Everything's going to be all right."
It was very scary. It was always girls being abducted and cars and vans walking along the road. I would hear, like, screaming. It just sounded like death, like somebody dying, somebody who's scared.
My grandfather was in the British Army in India, and Grandma was actually born in India because her father was an Army officer. They were supposed to go on the Titanic, and the night before they were supposed to leave, Grandma, who had been known to have visions, got this dreadful feeling that something was going to happen, and she told her husband, "We're not going on the ship." She said, "We cannot take the children on the ship tomorrow." And he got very impatient with her and said, "Oh," he said, "stop that nonsense, Hilda." He says, "Don't start that stuff again. You know, I'm not, that's ridiculous." Anyway, apparently she argued all night with him about it, and he finally listened to her, and they did not go on the Titanic.
Psychic messages sometimes seem to save us from accidental disaster. But can they also save us from man-made tragedies, the kind that come from violence? I'm Lawrence Chow. Today in Ghostly Encounters, we meet Merle Harris and Carolyn Mangaroo. As young girls, each was caught in a seemingly endless nightmare of brutality. Nightmares they believe were finally stopped by a voice from the other side. Merle grew up in Australia, where her loving family was being torn apart by her shell-shocked father.
Well, my father came back from being in North Africa. He was in the Second World War there. He had been wounded quite badly. He had his knee shattered from a bullet wound. He'd seen some of his friends killed when they were fighting in North Africa. He had suffered a lot of trauma because he had inner ear damage from a bomb blast, and his nerves were very, very shattered. And he was extremely highly strung and extremely difficult to deal with. My mother was beside herself. He would fly into violent rages, which he never did before. It was awful. I mean, we just, were terrified to come in the house a lot of the time. We just wanted to keep away from him. But we would often go to bed upset because there was usually an argument or something, or he'd start arguing over nothing. So we often cried ourselves to sleep, my sister and I. One particular night was very bad. Some small thing set him off, and he proceeded to just lash out at me. Particularly bad because there was a lot of arguing going on because Mum had found out what he had done. It was a particularly bad beating, worse than normal. So she was very she was just out beside herself, and they had a violent argument, and there was fighting going on all night. And I remember crying myself to sleep. During the evening, I woke up because I felt somebody tapping me on the shoulder. And I looked up and there was this lovely, kind-looking woman. And I thought, I know that face. And I'd seen a picture of her once before. It was my Grandma Hinks. She had this lovely light around her, and she had this very pale face, and she was very kind. She spoke very softly, and she said, you know, you mustn't worry. She said, everything's going to be all right. You know, you mustn't worry. And she was tapping me on the shoulder and reassuring me. And I was, you know, looking at her quite surprised, but I started to calm down, and I settled down, and I went back to sleep. And the next morning, I told my mother what happened, and I said, Mom, I said, is something wrong with me? You know, am I going crazy? You know, my mother said, no. She says, nothing's wrong with you. She said, Grandma Hinks came to reassure you, and she said she was worried about you, and she said, I think it's wonderful that she actually came and tried to make you feel better. I think she realized that there was a lot of violent energy around, and something had to be done. I think she thought, you know, I've got to help this child. I've got to do something here. Situations like this, especially when children are traumatized and there's a lot of electric energy in the air or something, I think it probably made her think, I've got to go there. I've got to go there, and I've got to help this child. You know, this child is in serious trouble. I didn't even think about it being a ghost. My mother took me to the doctor that day because I was black and blue from neck to toe. Bruises everywhere, because he'd been hitting me with the back of a hairbrush. And the doctor was extremely upset. And he said, this is no good. He said he should be charged. He said, this is terrible. And my mother said, well, he's gone. She said, I told him to leave. She just said, you know, you're upsetting me, you're upsetting the kids, and we can't live with you anymore. She said, I can't stand you anymore. She said, I love you, but I don't like you. I don't like you. I don't want to be around you. So he left. He left, and we didn't see him for a long time. He eventually took a job with Columbia Films in Australia, and he met an army psychologist who was one of the executives. This fellow became friendly with him, and he actually helped him a lot, because he dealt with men who had problems, you know, during the war. You know, they suffered all kinds of trauma. So he actually sat down and had a good talk to him, and it was almost like redemption, but he was much better after talking to this man. And my mother was amazing because, you know, when he came back, and he said, look, things are going to be different. I've changed. We kept telling her, Mom, don't take him back again. We don't want him here, you know. No, she said, I've seen him, and she said, he's different. He's not the same. So we listened to her because Mom was pretty level-headed, and anyway, he came back, and he was a different man. He was much more loving. He was much quieter. Much better. I mean, he had his temper. That was something that he always had, but he was never out of control. He was never violent again. Many years later, he said, you know, I never treated you well. He said, and I said, Dad, you know what? You had a bad time. You went through a bad time during the war. He said, no. He said, I shouldn't have taken it out on you and the family. And I said, well, let's look at it today. I said, you've turned into a great human being. It was almost like a complete change, like an awakening or something, but it was a good thing. I told Father about it quite a lot later on. He didn't seem too surprised because he had seen a ghost more than once himself. His own mother, of course, my grandmother, was psychic, and she held seances and that sort of thing, so he didn't seem terribly surprised. He said, you know, she was trying to she was trying to help the situation. I found out later that she was a very kind woman. Everybody loved her. Like Dad was always, later on, he always said that she was such a kind old lady. She used to give people a lot of information and help them, but she never did it for money. She did it strictly because she wanted to do it. And she felt she had a gift, so she shared it. But I remember seeing her, and she did have this eerie light around her. Her face was, quite white. But I knew right away who it was, even though I'd only seen her picture once. But it was a calming, very calming, peaceful feeling that came over me. And I was reassured that things would be better. And we've got a picture on the wall, and I look up every so often, I say, "Hi, there you are." I just look at that lovely, lovely, gentle expression on her face.
Merle suffered the consequences of evil, but she also brings comfort and hope. She believes that change in her father began with the appearance of her great-grandmother's ghost. Merle's waking nightmare was stopped, and her father's hard-won redemption has informed her own life to this day. Merle's family background is full of belief in the supernatural. In Scotland, the idea that some of us have the sight is quite common. Merle's grandmother and even her father told of seeing ghosts. Caroline Mangrew also believes she has inherited psychic abilities from a relative, her mother. And like Merle, she comes from a culture steeped in the supernatural in her native Trinidad.
Anytime I walk into a house, I can automatically tell if there is an evil presence there or if there's nothing. If there's evil, I will see it or I will feel it. I will just know. Something might tell me, whether it's telepathically or I'll see images in my head, that something bad happened at that house. And usually I can pinpoint the exact spot in the house. I would say that probably started as early as 5 years old. I remember going into my aunt's house and feeling a lot of evil. I always told my parents I wanted to go back home. This house has evil in it. There's something happened here. They would tell me that, well, there had been a lot of murders in the area and maybe I was just seeing those ghosts, and I would just never want to stay there very long because I always thought they were gonna follow me. I would see a lot of dark shadows coming out of the brickwork. I just sensed a lot of evil. I sensed murder. I would see black shadows, just like a whoosh. They sort of had a head, but like a big tail. I would hear like screaming, wailing. It just sounded like death, like somebody dying, somebody who's scared. I can almost see the presence if it's very near me. I just know. It just comes into my head what happened there. It's almost as if they're talking to me. It's just a feeling I get, but then at the same time, it's like I can hear either they're screaming or wailing, and I just instantly know that something bad happened here, or like a murder or something. At my aunt's house, when in Trinidad, I would go in there and I would see ghosts flying out of the house. And specifically, I would feel the presence at the back of her house, in the back porch. And later, she told me that's where somebody had been murdered before they moved into that house. It plagued me a lot in nightmares. I had a lot of nightmares. Sometimes I couldn't stay in my bed. I'd have to go, and I slept with my parents a lot because I always saw things in my room. I always felt people around me. It's just scary, but now I kind of pretty much used to it. When I first moved to Canada, I guess I kind of put it at the back of my mind. I didn't really think too much about it. It came forward again when I started having premonition-type dreams of girls being abducted and reoccurring every single night, sometimes several in one night. It was very scary. It was always girls being abducted in cars and vans walking along the road or from their houses. They would just grab her into the van, and that's it. And she was gone so fast. I've seen others where they chase the girls and they're running through backyards, hopping fences, but in every one they always get caught. I think they were premonitions, and I think if I maybe watched the news a little bit more, pay attention, news in the States or anything, I may have seen something that I recognized. I wrote them in a journal. Every time I would have one the next morning, I tried to remember as best as I could. Sometimes I would actually see license plates, and I'd write that down as well. But I haven't looked in that journal in many, many years. It's packed away in a box, and I just don't want to remember it.
The nightmares must have been unbearable. Unlike the TV shows Ghost Whisperer and Medium, Carolyn couldn't connect her dreams with any real abductions, and so couldn't help solve them. But that wasn't the end. The nightmares would get even more horrifying.
I used to walk home from school at that point, and I was absolutely terrified to walk home by myself. Sometimes I used to try to dress like a boy because I thought that I only saw girls being abducted. It felt so real. Sometimes it felt like it was happening to me, and I thought maybe I was the person, and maybe they were coming to abduct me, and it was scary. I actually had a dream where at first it was a different girl, but it changed into me that was abducted on the way walking from school. It hurt me so much to think about something like that and to happen to little girls. And that morning I woke up, and as I woke up and it was bright light in my room, I saw this face of a little boy standing beside my bed, and he talked to me telepathically, and he said, "Don't worry, everything is gonna be okay." His face was very, very clear, like he was right in front of me, but he was wearing white and the rest of him was almost faded away. When I heard him talk, it was a little boy's voice in my head saying everything would be all right, you know, you'll be fine. It was as if he was opening his mouth and talking to me. It was that clear in my head. He stood like 2 feet in front of me, and it was very clear. As soon as I saw him and he was in white, I knew he was good, and he just seemed like an angel, and I just knew he was mine. I think he knew that I couldn't take it anymore, and I was being overloaded with dreams and premonitions, as I call them. I believe they were. And he just knew, in my heart, he knew it was too much for me to handle, and it was time to come and calm me down and say it's okay. The nightmares stopped and never happened again. I felt so much better. I felt relief. I felt like Jesus was around me. I felt very, very touched. I think if you're open to believing in God and believing in spirits, then you'll be more open to seeing things like that. But at the same time, we pray so that we don't see the wrong type of spirits or bring in the wrong thing. I'm pretty comforted by it. I know that there are good ghosts, and I know that there is an afterlife to go to.
Merle and Carolyn's experiences have convinced him that there is goodness at the heart of the universe, a positive force that is stronger than man's evil. Goodness seemed to come to them as a spiritual visitor or guardian angel. As a child, each received remarkably similar messages, reassuring them that everything was going to be all right. And for both of them, this proved to be true.
I don't think anybody can understand these things unless you've been through something similar yourself, or you've spoken to somebody that is credible, and And you realize that people have experienced some things. I mean, why some people experience stuff and others don't? Are some of us more open to things? I can't say.
I hope that people will see this and believe and not think that everybody who says they see a ghost is crazy. I think we see these things for a reason, and I think a lot of times ghosts are trying to tell us something.